Guten Morgen, YouTube. Ich bin Michael Löwenstern und dieses Stück ist Götterdämmerung von Richard Wagner. Es spielt my German is, I'm losing it. It was played by the Cleveland Orchestra, and it was a recording from 1969. This is George Zell and the incomparable Robert Marcellus playing principal clarinet. And the bass clarinetist, I actually had to look up. It had been a while since I'd actually thought about who was playing bass clarinet during those years that Robert Marcellus was playing. And it's a guy named Al Zetsa. He was freaking playing bass clarinet with Robert Marcellus, and I can only imagine the kinds of card games those guys would play. Al Zetsa. So Al Zetsa and Robert Marcellus playing Wagner's Götterdämmerung. And we're going to talk about this excerpt today because it is on just about every bass clarinet audition. Now, it's not an incredibly hard excerpt to play. It's not, finger technique difficult, but it requires legato fingers, which we're going to talk about. It's in bass clef, which is an issue for some who don't know bass clef. So in that recording, you heard Marcellus playing quite a bit louder than the bass clarinet, Al Zetsa. And in my view, they should be balanced, right? It shouldn't be that, clarinet is the solo and bass clarinet is part of the ensemble. No, this is a duet between the two of them. I would argue that in a performing situation, when you're playing this in an orchestra, you're going to want to make sure that you and the clarinetist agree on what the volume is. But since the clarinetist plays first, you have to match whatever it is that they do in a performance environment. So if they play a little bit softer than they do in a rehearsal or louder, you're going to have to figure out how to match that because the two of them should be of equal volume. In an orchestral audition situation, obviously, you're on your own. There's not another clarinet player there. However, often in the final rounds of an orchestral audition, they will bring the first clarinetist in to play, and you will play the duet with them, and they're going to probably be looking for things like blend and whatever. The first thing you're going to have to think about as you're playing this is you need to be able to play it in time. You just kind of want to play it musically, but you do not want to take this, like sort of crazy rubato as if it was a solo bass clarinet piece. So play it within the confines of rhythm and time, and make sure that you are playing with a nice full sound. Don't push on any of the notes so they start to spread. Just keep it nice, contained, in time, and with a beautiful round sound. Let's see if I can actually do that. So that's the first excerpt. Okay, obviously that end part, it's all 2D. They may not ask you to play that, but I did. Okay, so let's talk about this. All right, so the first thing we're going to have to contend with here is bass clef. This excerpt is in bass clef. And if you don't know bass clef and you want to play orchestral music, you're going to have to learn bass clef first. I suppose you could write it all out and sort of play off of transposed parts, but you should just learn bass clef, okay? Because it's a clef that you need to know. So let's talk about that. Treble clef on the clarinet. When you see a note, it sounds down one step. So when you see a C and you play a C, it sounds a B flat, sounds down a step. However, on bass clarinet, when you see that same C, it doesn't sound down a step, it sounds down an octave and a step. And that should make sense to you because I'm fingering the same note on clarinet as bass clarinet, and bass clarinet is an octave lower than a clarinet. So it sounds down a step plus an octave. So here's a grand staff. A grand staff is what piano players play, and that's, it's something that uses both bass and treble clef. So that middle C in the middle of that grand staff is played like so, with 3 fingers, right? On a clarinet and on a bass clarinet. However, if you were to remove the treble clef part of it and just look at that note on bass clarinet, it's not played with 3 fingers. Actually, you have to play it up an octave, and it is middle C. So that is the confusing part, because when you play middle C, it's actually playing the same pitch as when the clarinet plays 3-finger C. Why? Because the bass clarinet's an octave lower. So when you're reading bass clef, that note, that same middle C, which you would have seen in a grand staff, that middle C is actually played long C, that way. So when you want to play the 3-finger C, it's actually written down here in the second space. So that second space C is this. So you're just going to have to learn that, okay? So when you're playing bass clef on bass clarinet, just learn the fingerings that's the C, and the first note of this particular excerpt is this F. It's written on the 4th line. So 4th line F is thumb. All right, so that's how this bass clef part works. You're going to have to learn this. If you need to, if this is confusing to you, and I imagine it might be, Google is your best friend. Check it out. But that's all we're going to talk about in terms of bass clef today. You just kind of have to learn it, and you have to learn what fingerings go with what note that you're seeing on the page. Okay, so now let's actually play and take a look at the part itself. This is legato, right? The job that you have here, it's molto dolce, very sweetly. It's written piano, but it's a solo piano. It's not piano practice room piano. It's piano orchestra sitting in the back of an orchestra playing for a couple thousand people piano. So it's a bigger piano than you might imagine. And in an orchestral audition, they're going to want to know that that piano is not practice room size. It's orchestral stage size. So it's a full sound, and so you can blow a little bit more air through the instrument and you get a fuller sound. Now, the thing that's a challenge about this is that it needs to be legato and you're going over the break. So legato air and legato fingers. So what are legato fingers? What is not legato fingering? Well, not legato fingering is when you're slapping your fingers down, and you can hear that sometimes. And when you're going over the break, sometimes you have it to get a little muscular because, you have to make sure that all of your fingers are coordinated, and sometimes that results in using more muscles and more slap sound. You can't do that. So legato fingering is where you squeeze the instrument. You don't push the keys down, you don't slap the keys down, you think about squeezing it. And so a good way to practice this is by getting a couple nice fat rolls of toilet paper, and you want to be squeezing the toilet paper like you would be squeezing the keys. So when you squeeze the toilet paper, there's a give to it. So when you think da 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 dee, da da, those fingers are going down, but they're squeezing. They're not slapping. And there's something nice about the toilet paper that makes you feel like there's this little give to the to the paper itself. Your instrument you can fake that as well. So body, get a couple rolls of toilet paper, you will totally know what I'm talking about. So squeeze the toilet paper, then go to your clarinet. It will feel different. Your clarinet will actually feel like you're sinking into it. And it will all automatically make it sound more legato, and it will feel like you're squeezing the instrument. So if someone's ever telling you, play with legato fingers, whip out the toilet paper and give it a squeeze, and then come back to your instrument. It's amazing. It really works. Okay, let's move on to the second excerpt. Okay, so this is the second excerpt. This is bracketed by French horn solos they're practicing on for their audition. This is yours. There's not a second clarinet in here, and it's written pianissimo. Let's give it a listen. Etc. Okay, so what are the things that you need to think about for this? Again, you need to think legato fingerings. You do not want those big intervals. Often you're thinking, all right, I'm going to hit that, I'm going to get all those fingers coordinated. Just think toilet paper, okay? Squeeze that interval out. That sounded really weird. Squeeze Just squeeze that interval out. Okay, so I'm going to play it for you. Here's a little pro tip. Suck the spit out of your reed before you play this excerpt. Oftentimes you're playing, you're thinking, you forget to do something like that. Just remember, write it in if you have to. Suck the spit off the back of the reed, because otherwise you're going to get the gurgling, and it's going to totally ruin this excerpt for you. So, here we go. So I'm blowing through that entire excerpt. I don't decrescendo at the end because it's moving toward the second French horn solo. There's a tendency to actually kind of want to decrescendo, because if you were to take this excerpt in isolation, it would sound musical if you were to sort of taper off at the end. But in context, that would be the wrong thing to do. So that's the last thing I'm going to say is, always understand the contexts of your excerpts. Know what's happening before and after it, know what's happening with it. This happens to be a solo with like just, timpani. But if there's other stuff happening, you need to know that as well. You need to know if it's something that's played just like this before you play it, so that you need to know you need to match it. So understand the context. Don't play excerpts in isolation thinking they are just small pieces of music, because they are parts of a larger piece of music. Okay, so that's it for this week. This is Götterdämmerung, which is part of the Ring cycle. This is Wagner's 5.5-hour mega opera. And so anyway, good luck if you're going to go watch it. Just make sure that you're well fed before you go. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.